really hotting up with some real great sprinting. The fourth Formula 1 Sprint Grand Prix weekend of the 2026-2026 has now well and truly started with a very exciting sprint race, the British Sprint that we haven't had since 2021, and 5 years on. It really did live up to the expectations, when once again you had Lewis Hamilton at the top of the field, charging, fighting for the victory, but this time it was with another teenager, Kimi Antonelli. So in this exclusive, sprint reaction, where we are really already heading quite unbelievably into the second half of the 2026-2026 Formula 1 season, we will tell you everything about how this sprint race went, why we are not listening, just like we did during the Chinese sprint, to that wonderful Italian anthem to celebrate the Scarlet Red victory for Scuderia Ferrari, and why maybe that's also good, because we will have to make some changes in order to be more competitive for the upcoming qualifying and of course for the Grand Prix proper, which is kind of all that matters. But there's also the Sprint Championship to go for, so we will then take a look in this Scarlet Red Retina iMac and how the race finished, and of course we will then take a look at the driver's table, the constructor's table, but also we will discuss if we would have that sprint championship, how the tables would look like. So, are you ready for an exciting roller coaster ride at the place where it all began 76 years ago? Of course you are. So over here, obviously, me maybe overdressed for very, very hot conditions. As you can see, me sweating already in this beautiful summer 2026-2026, as we still are hot on the heels from our happy birthday, happy wedding anniversary celebrations. It's all happy Independence Day, and the Formula 1 drivers have really been given the all green, all clear, to go and be fully independent and to put on a wonderful show. Starting with the sprint qualifying on Friday late afternoon there in the northern England at the famous Silverstone circuit. Lewis Hamilton put it on a pole position by 11 hundredths of a second from Kimi Antonelli with a wonderful lap. And since he was fastest in sprint qualifying 1, sprint qualifying 2, this really bodes well for the rest of the weekend. And of course, in the sprint, the deployment, the battery did play a lot of the role. So we had another great race, kind of like what we had in Australia over here, where you really had to be not just fast but also smart. But clearly we have the ultimate pace to challenge definitely the Mercedes-Benz of Kimi Antonelli, and we pretty much have George Russell, the homeboy, in the pocket, just like the young 19-year-old teenager from Italy who might be racing for Scuderia Ferrari there in the future, has him in a pocket as well. Surprisingly, Russell obviously being even outside of the second row, which was filled out by Verstappen of Red Bull with an opportunistic lap, and Charles Leclerc, who obviously also is struggling now, to keep up with Lewis Hamilton. So it's quite interesting to see the dynamic of the team battles at the Scarlet Red Ferraris and at the Silver Arrows, where you have basically Leclerc starting as a team leader and Hamilton clearly being the slower one, and the situation has pretty much completely reversed. Just like in Mercedes-Benz, you had George Russell, having Antonelli in a pocket. Now Antonelli is easily beating him. So, since Hamilton and Antonelli were 3/10 clear of the rest, we probably could have expected a big fight between them. And oh boy, it was a fight. When the 5 red lights went out, there was a bit of a delay, and actually it didn't, help us a lot. Hamilton got a decent start, Leclerc poorer start. He was even stuck behind Verstappen, Red Bull again going way backwards, at the start. But Antonelli with Mercedes, suddenly, he's gotten a very, very good start, right? So the hope was, in order to win the sprint, that Antonelli doesn't immediately start challenging us, right? And he was almost past, as we went through the Abbey chicane, but Hamilton was very tough with Antonelli. And, it's great to see the respect between, somebody who's just half his age. Normally the teenager would obviously be overexcited, and not really playing fair, but Antonelli, despite having that Italian, the red hot blood of maybe Scuderia Ferrari, he is great in the way he races wheel to wheel. So Hamilton was first, Antonelli slotted in behind him. Norris thought he was smart, right, because he obviously jumped both Verstappen and Leclerc, so he used all of his battery by the mid lap, and he even got them past Antonelli, which was great for Hamilton, as he was able to open up the gap. And it was really there, because once we put it on pole position, once we let from the field, once we let the field from the start of the race, it was really, from there that, Hamilton should have kept that gap, right? But it's clear in a race stream that the Scarlet Ferrari probably wasn't that quick. So once Antonelli has gotten past Norris, who was then obviously out of the battery, which made for a great spectacle. I personally love it, when the overtaking, is really happening nicely throughout the lap. It was critical for Hamilton to stay over 1 second clear of Antonelli. Why? Because, once obviously Antonelli went past Norris, Norris then dropped back into that huge kerfuffle, big tussle between him, his teammate, George Russell, at one point, getting past both McLarens, getting overtaken back. At one point, you had Verstappen going there. Leclerc nicely biding his time and then picking them up one by one. But all of the times, they lost 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds to the leaders. But Antonelli, crucially, was able to get within a second of Hamilton. And, you could then tell, okay, is Lewis able, to really extract the speed of the Ferrari? So Antonelli doesn't always get that overtake, right? Which allows you to deploy extra energy if you are within 1 second of the car in front, which sadly he was behind Lewis for several laps, and it was clear that he probably just topped up his battery and then went for it. He has gotten closer and closer, and Hamilton basically had nothing to defend once we've gotten to lap 9 or 10. But a great defense. Again, it's a bit of a pity over here that what happened after was that Hamilton was not able to overtake Antonelli. I think that's the greatest strength of the young Italian, that unlike the other drivers, most notably his illustrious teammate, once they overtake, they always, get overtaken back. But here, I was hoping that if Hamilton would get overtaken, that he would get Antonelli back, because then he would have the overtake. But what happened was that on lap 10, Antonelli has gotten really close, heading into the left field at the end of the Wellington Straight. And because, Hamilton deployed quite a lot of the boost, he was not able to recharge much, going through the slow section and then basically heading all the way, into the entrance of the cups and all the way to the stove, there wouldn't be much of an opportunity to recharge. And, you could see that once he got into Meggett's and Beckett's, then all of a sudden he was a sitting duck. So it was kind of an anticlimax to, what was really great defending by Hamilton, great driving. At one point, it looked like he had Antonelli covered. But, sadly, once again, Hamilton was unable kind of, to create the gap, then with that constant overtake being under constant attack, Hamilton would use more and more battery until he had none left on the straight, which is maybe not the smartest way to do. But again, if at the beginning he would be able to keep that gap between him and Antonelli over 1 second for, let's say, 3-4 more laps, that could have been the victory, I believe. But it also could have been the victory once he's gotten the overtake. That's very funny and very interesting, that once we're behind Antonelli, given that, we had the same speed in qualifying, that we were unable, with Hamilton, to get him back, right? Quite quickly, within 3 or 4 laps, he would have fallen over 1 second behind. And just like you've seen in the previous races, especially at the beginning of the season, before McLarens and Red Bulls through their crying have gotten some tweaks, to the way the power units and the deployment and everything, works, and they've gotten back into the picture. You could see that we are still unable to get back at Mercedes-Benz. But in the end, Hamilton finished 2.7 seconds behind, but was constantly within 2 seconds. So that would bode well for the Grand Prix, where obviously, that would allow you, for example, to have a chance to undercut the leading car, right? And still, for example, go ahead and then be ahead, for example, after the pit stop, and hopefully then race it to the checkered flag. So I'm very, very optimistic, but of course disappointed, because I felt this would be a great place for Hamilton to win. But if you prefer Grand Prix or a sprint, we definitely prefer the Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc did a good job. I was pretty pleased, with his performance, but again, he started 4th, finished 5th. So I think he put in a good fight, but it's clear that finishing 10 seconds behind your 7-time world champion teammate is, unlike Charles, he's not that strong over here. But I felt, that he was maybe the smartest the way he fought. He discarded Piastri well, was able to then pass and create a gap to Verstappen, but sadly, not to Russell and Norris, because Leclerc, if he has gotten, again, you sitting in a Ferrari, if you've gotten a really good start, and you would have stayed clear of that battle, maybe even get ahead of Antonelli, that would have been almost slam dunk Ferrari sprint victory. So sadly, Leclerc was unable to join that fight, drop back pretty much, instead of, maybe being even a second after the start, and that really, undid his race. Because once you're fighting, obviously, you are not thinking thinking about the ideal deployment. That's why Hamilton and Antonelli were able, for example, to maximize their lap time, unlike the others, and that's why they led the field by almost a dozen of seconds. So yeah, exciting sprint. I mean, I greatly enjoyed. But of course, we were wishing for a victory. So let's take a look at how it finished and what repercussions, does it really have over here. So let's check it out. So over here you can see Andrea, Kimi Antonelli, and thank you to the F1 website for actually, providing over here, again, the results which they did in Austria that cost us a lot of time. So Antonelli won the pulsating race over here, the sprint, obviously 17 laps, I believe. It was from Lewis Hamilton. So again, one of the oldest, if not the oldest driver. Alonso really, doesn't count at this point, does he? And of course, against the youngest driver, it's really exciting, to see them going on it with a lot of respect. And it really shows, the different generations, how they adapt to these great, all new, innovative 2026 cars. Reigning world champion Lando Norris got on his sprint podium. Again, he's kind of funny because I would be celebrating the sprint as well, especially if you think about the sprint championship. But Norris is always like, yeah, this is just a sprint, I don't really care. But the good thing was that for the top 3 drivers, they were the karting champions, giving them the trophies. So a lot of the times it is the let's say celebrity, right, giving the trophy. But I like this touch when they let, for example, the karting champions, both the boys and girls, present the sprint awards, which I think they should make the trophies better as well for the sprint. Norris should be, a bit more grateful because he could have well finished 7th like his teammate Piastri, and nobody would care about him. So 4th is then George Russell. He has a lot to think about because that was a poor sprint performance by him. 5th, Charles Leclerc, also a lot to think about. Lewis is doing so well. Charles could have easily finished 3rd over here. 6th, Max Verstappen, Red Bull, back to where he belongs. 7, Oscar Piastri. 8, Liam Lawson, and 9 we have Isaac Hadjar, 10 Arvid Lindblad. There was an investigation because obviously Lawson moved quite aggressively heading into the stall when Hadjar maybe a bit optimistically thought he would overtake him with a couple of laps to go to get that final sprint point. But at the end of the day, Lawson kind of took the racing line, so he was kind of warned, be more aware, right? His awareness is not that great, obviously, we do know. One of the reasons maybe why he was demoted back to the Racing Bulls, but in the end the result stands. And for the championship, it would be a big repercussions that Russell was unable to beat Norris because they both would have 26 points, in the table, with George Russell taking 2 sprint victories. Norris 1 now. Antonelli, this is his maiden sprint victory, I believe over here this season. So yeah, the championship, would be very exciting, right? And completely different people would be leading it, with Russell on 26 points, leading based on the fact that he won 2 sprints to the Norris's 1. But Norris, who's kind of nowhere in the Drivers' Championship, just 4th ahead of Leclerc, and will be heading back to 5th, or maybe even 6th after the Grand Prix is finished, I believe, is actually fighting for the sprint championship. So definitely Formula 1, you should make it. If I would be a driver, I would already just start doing it because, this would make the sprints actually, even more exciting given how great the racing is. Andrea Kimi Antonelli is now 3rd in a sprint championship with 21 points. And he has the same amount of points as Charles Leclerc, who is also on 21. We then have Lewis Hamilton, who would be 5th on 18 points. And, then we would have Oscar Piastri, I believe, who would have 17 points and who would be 6th. Max Verstappen would be only 7th, lowly, only 9 points actually overall from the sprints. And the funny thing is that the driver who is, by far ahead of, anybody else, the only driver who has won over a decade, more than 10 sprints, once we started sprinting, obviously, in that legendary 2021 season, he would actually be out of the fight for the sprint over here, for the sprint championship by a point. So, that would be quite interesting that the most successful sprint driver in history would not even be able to become a sprint champion. And yeah, Liam Lawson over here, he would actually still be 8th with 3 points. Lawson is doing very well in the sprints, over there. And then we would have, I believe, Pierre Gasly and Oliver Behrman and Arvid Lindblad, who also finished in the top 10 on 1 point respectively in that sprint table. So you can see it would be very, very exciting, and obviously Mercedes would then be leading the sprint championship, because obviously they would have 47 points, and we would then have a McLaren being right up there with 43 points. Second, Ferrari would be third, obviously courtesy of the Hamilton and Leclerc, 39 points, and Red Bull would be there on 9 points. Fourth in the standings. Racing Bulls would be fifth on 4 points, and then you would have the Alpine sixth on 1 point, and Haas 7 on 1 point, with obviously no points definitely going to Williams, but also the Aston Martin, Cadillac, that's without a saying, but also Audi, for example. So you can see how the sprint championship looks like. This is how the actual drivers, championship looks like over here. So yes, I'm happy that it is now, back to how it should be. So in the 2026 Formula 1 Drivers Championship, before we start the second part of this round 9, which is really should have been round 11 of the championship, Andrea Antonelli extends his lead to 179 points. George Russell is on 134 points. Lewis Hamilton on 136 points. Lewis Hamilton third on 132 points. And then is a reigning world champion Lando Norris for McLaren, 85 points. Charles Leclerc for Ferrari is fifth, 83 points. Oscar Piastri sixth, McLaren 82 points. 7, Max Verstappen, Red Bull 76 points. 8 is Isaac Hadjar, Red Bull 42 points, but again no points in the sprints, mostly because of these very, very poor getaways at the starts. 9, Pierre Gasly, Alpine 41 points. 10, Liam Lawson, Racing Bulls 31 points. To the second half of the standings, 11, Oliver Behrman has on 18 points. 12 is Franco Colapinto, Alpine 16 points. 13 is Arvid Lindblad, Racing Bulls 14 points. It will be interesting to see if he can get points in his home race. 14, Carlos Sainz, Williams 6 points. 15, Alexander Albon, Williams 5 points. 16 is then Esteban Ocon, Haas 3 points. 17, Gabriel Bortolotto, Audi 2 points. And 18, Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin 2 points. We will see Nico Hülkenberg definitely outside Chad for his first points of the season. He's 19 on Audi on 0 points, but remember, he held off Hamilton last year for his only podium in a Formula 1. So Hülkenberg, I think, definitely will be getting first points for Audi, even though they don't seem to be super competitive here. But it is a Grand Prix. Anything can happen over a race distance. 20th is then, of course, Valtteri Bottas, Cadillac 0 points. 21st, Sergio Perez, Cadillac 0 points. 22nd, Lance Stroll, Aston Martin 0 points. So very, very exciting obviously over here how the table kind of looks like. And here let's take a look at the Constructors' Championship in the 2026-2026 season. So Mercedes leading with 315 points, and us, Scuderia Ferrari, are there on 215 points. So I believe we are, yes, exact 100 points behind. McLaren is third on 167 points. Red Bull is fourth on 118 points. Fifth, Alpine 57 points. Sixth, Racing Bulls 45 points. Kind of they are the regular point scorers now. 7, Haas 21 points. 8, Williams 11 points. 9, Audi 2 points. 10, Aston Martin 1 point, and the new team, the newcomers, Cadillac 11th on 0 points. So this is how it looks like in a Constructors' Championship. In the Drivers' Championship, we obviously already talked about the Sprint Constructors and the Sprint Drivers' Championships as well. And congratulations to Andrea Antonelli, who can now win the sprints as well. So hope you enjoyed this very, very special sprint reaction. Okay, so put the red retina Scarlet, red Ferrari, red retina iMac back, and we cannot wait over here to see what will happen. Of course, in the qualifying, the race proper, I mean, we have a great chance. We were dominant in Barcelona. I think definitely we gotta think about the deployment in the second half of the lap. Because Antonelli was always quicker there, so he was always able to get an overtake. So maybe we can try to deploy the energy in a different way. But overall, this was a great sprint, we greatly enjoyed. And of course, concurrently, we are not sprinting, at least not this particular weekend that you will see, even though we are maybe already doing some sprinting in that concurrent 2025 season. But you've already seen my fastest lap over here, that was pretty much over 2 seconds quicker than what Hamilton and Antonelli, almost identical time, that they achieved. So you can see over here, you can really fly around this great track, which always provides a great racing. And we cannot wait to see what will happen there. Also, keep supporting me as I will be trying to qualify on pole position, for the race that is the closest to my home, obviously for the Austrian Grand Prix that I will be showing this weekend, as obviously I'm aiming to win on my happy birthday. Happy wedding anniversary! That's right, that's right, that's right. So let me know how you like this great fashion, and let me know how you like this great sprint reaction. This was the 4th Sprint Grand Prix weekend of the 2026 FIA Formula 1 season, the round 11. Really around 9, but should be around 11 of the championship, the one and only British Grand Prix. But now, we've gotten the small trophies. Now it's time for the best trophy. You can see I've won this British Grand Prix 3 times. But what I love the most about the Silverstone, especially how it's a remodel, is not these big Silverstone letters, but the big golden trophy that they show, with the real trophy being presented right above the podium, where you have all of the champions, all of the drivers who have won the British Grand Prix, including Michael Schumacher, who obviously managed to win in the pits, in a very unique victory. So let's hope it will be another unique victory for Scuderia Ferrari. This is the place where we started our winning journey in Formula 1 in 1951 with Jose Florian Gonzalez. So 75 years after that first triumph, let's see if maybe Lewis Hamilton, maybe Charles Leclerc will surprise, but Hamilton does look on form. It would be great if he would win. Maybe Mercedes boys will crash and we are back in title fight. That's right, that's right, that's right. So everybody, let's enjoy this home of Formula 1, the home of the best, fastest racing in the world. Everybody, say it with me. We love racing, we love Formula 1, we love Ferrari. Forza Ferrari!